He seemed like an honest man. I then proceeded to call my message machine.
Hi, this message is for Aaron Russo. This is Anthony Burke at the Internal Revenue Service. Let me suggest some people that you might want to think about talking to. One would be Don Alexander, who's a former commissioner who's here in town in Washington. Another would be Sheldon Cohen, who is both a former commissioner and former chief counsel. All those guys, I think, can answer your question about, where in the tax law it says that you have to pay taxes.
Wow, good news, I thought. So I called Sheldon Cohen because he used to be the IRS commissioner. He wrote the tax code, and he was also general counsel to the IRS. He is a true expert, and I couldn't find a better person to answer my questions. He graciously agreed to my interview. The reason I'm doing this documentary is because there are many people in America today who believe that there's no law that requires them to pay an income tax or file a 1040. And there are many people going to jail for it, fighting over it.
The Internal Revenue Code is authorized by the 16th Amendment.
I think it should be clarified. I think government should be transparent to the people. Why doesn't the IRS commissioner sit down with them and just explain it in clear English? Why?
I don't think they really care. I think they're just playing word games.
You don't think they're sincere people?
No, I don't think they're sincere people.
What does voluntary compliance mean? And why does the IRS code say it's voluntary to comply, not mandatory?
That's a word euphemism we use. We use voluntary compliance when we talk about traffic signals. Most people, at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you stop at a red light?
Yeah.
Is there a cop there?
Sometimes I don't.
Well, I do, and most of us do. Most of us do.
Right.
But that's voluntary compliance.
That was a complete perversion of logic. Traffic laws state that it is mandatory to stop at a red light. The IRS code says it's voluntary to comply. Mandatory and voluntary are the complete opposite of each other. Yet he wants us to believe that they mean the same thing. So can the government criminally prosecute somebody of information put on their 1040?
Yes.
Right, so doesn't that violate the Fifth Amendment?
No.
But the Fifth Amendment says I don't have to do anything that incriminates myself.
Well, it doesn't incriminate you to put your income down.
But you said before I could be put in jail for it. The commissioner wants us to believe that although the IRS demands that you fill out the 1040 and you can go to jail for it, that they are not violating your Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination. That is absurd. Isn't it true that the word income is not defined anywhere in the Internal Revenue Code?
The law says that the government has a right to tax income from any source derived.
So, but the word income is not defined in the code. It just says income without a definition
That's right.
of what income is.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah.
But there are many different kinds of taxes. Well, how can an American citizen know what income is if the code doesn't define it? If they're paying an income
because
tax...
the courts have all defined it.
Do you remember what constitutional attorney Edwin Vieira said?
The definition of income in the Constitution was given in the Eisner versus Macomber case, and it turns on gains or profits that are made from some activity.
So the Supreme Court has ruled income is not wages, it's not labor, it's gain from corporate activity. I believe that a man's labor is his private property.
That's your view, but it's not the law.
The Supreme Court's even said your labor is your private property. When I go to work for somebody, it's a trade. It's an even exchange. I do some work, you give me some money.
In 1916, we had the Bruce-Shaber case and the Stanton case. And the Bruce-Shaber case and the Stanton case said that the 16th Amendment gave the government no new taxing power.
I'm not going to argue the niceties of that with you.
And it came up again in a case called Peck versus Lowe, where the Supreme Court said the 16th Amendment did not extend Congress's taxing power to any new or accepted subjects. In other words, if you weren't taxable before the 16th, you weren't taxable after the 16th.
Today I interviewed a juror. okay, who sat on a case, and they found the person not guilty for lack of filing, okay? And I asked her why they found him not guilty. And she said because the IRS couldn't show us the law that made him liable to file a 1040.
All they need to do, if there is a law, is to show us the law, which of course they never did.
And the reason they didn't do it was why?
Because there is no law.
Title 26 requires you to file a return.
But doesn't Title 26 have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court decisions?
You're going to take a 1920 case and superimpose it on the whole Internal Revenue Code that was written after it? No, that's not.
I can't believe what I just heard. Rewind.
You're going to take a 1920 case and superimpose it on the whole Internal Revenue Code that was written after it? No, that's not.
Remember he said earlier the Internal Revenue Code was authorized by the 16th Amendment?
The Internal Revenue Code is authorized by the 16th Amendment.
Remember, the Supreme Court said the 16th Amendment did not give the government any new taxing power. These decisions have never been overturned. Let's listen further. Can the lower courts overrule the Supreme Court?
No.
How are they putting people in jail today for not paying a tax on their labor when the Supreme Court said they don't have to? Doesn't the IRS code have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court? That's my big
Aaron,
question.
this is a waste of time.
Well, let me
Because whatever I say, you're not going to believe.
He's right. I don't believe him. And neither should you. He wants us to believe we should obey the IRS code, which is being enforced in violation of the many Supreme Court decisions. If the Supreme Court made a decision...
Thank you, Aaron. I think we're finished.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen, you're doing that.
Well, I'm sorry that you constantly re-argue the point. You're liable because the law says that you're liable, and the courts say the law says you're liable, and that's why you're liable.
You see, he's talking about the lower courts, who are not in compliance with the Supreme Court, as they have to be. Doesn't the court have to be in compliance with the Supreme Court?
The Supreme Court has so held.
Where?
You caught me unprepared.
I'll come back.
Well, I don't want to do that.
But let me ask you a hypothetical question.
No. You're making silly arguments here.
Why is the Supreme Court decision a silly argument?
Well, because it's inapplicable.
That made my heart stop. He just said Supreme Court decisions do not apply to the IRS. That's the behavior you would expect from a totalitarian country, maybe China or Russia or Cuba. Not from America. They're just making up the law as they go along. Now I knew the tax honesty movement was right. The IRS thrives on intimidation and fear, not by law. It's no different than a criminal protection racket, using force to extract your money from you. Then the former IRS commissioner, now working at a prestigious Washington law firm, threatens me. Watch.
Aaron, you understand Yiddish, Cornish helfen.
For those of you who don't understand Yiddish, that means nothing will help you. Now it all became clear. I understood why the IRS wouldn't go on camera and talk about where the law was. I understood why all the senators I called refused to be interviewed. There is no law. And now you know what our political leaders and the courts have known for decades and have tried to cover up. The United States Constitution strictly forbids a direct, unapportioned tax on the wages and salaries of American citizens. The United States Supreme Court has consistently ruled that the income tax is a tax on profits and gains, not on labor and wages. On behalf of the American people, I challenge the IRS to show me a statute that allows a direct, unapportioned tax on the wages and labor of the American people. And if I'm wrong, I will give my most humble apologies to the IRS. If the IRS is wrong, and there is no law, then every person who's been jailed should be let out of jail immediately, and any assets seized should be returned to their rightful owners. If this is a nation of laws and a free country, then the IRS should show the law to the American people. I felt an overwhelming need to understand why juries were finding innocent people guilty of not filing a tax return when there was no law requiring them to do so. So I went to talk to Marcy Brooks, a juror who used her common sense and did not allow the judge to railroad the jury into a guilty verdict.
He was being tried for 4 counts of not filing his income tax.
Okay.
And our question was, well, what is to decide? Either he did or he didn't. It never occurred to us that he might actually be innocent while at the same time not filing. In the federal government, it is not a felony not to file taxes. Finally, they said, okay, if we're going to get this guy, we're going to have to put it in the state. They called up the IRS agent, Agent Craner.
Craner?
Yeah.
Robert Craner?
Mm-hmm. This is Ken Doherty. He's also an investigator with the Illinois Department of Revenue.
This is a request for a copy of the delegation of authority order.
Right, and I talked to my boss about that, and he said that my badge is that.
Badge is the authority. I thought it had to be in writing.
The last question that the defense asked him was, did you write any of this down? And Agent Craner looked right at him and right at us, and he said, I never wrote anything down. And yet when we saw the video, there he was, writing notes, you know. And so I'm thinking, okay, at this point, the judge is supposed to say, Agent Craner, it is clear that you have committed perjury. It wasn't even noticed. It finally came to the climax. Mr. Harrell looked right at the prosecutor, and he said, I will tell you the same thing I have told over and over again to government officials. You show me the law that requires me to file a tax return, and I'll be glad to do it.
And again, I ask, under what is the requirement that you claim and are required to do these things? And the requirement under the regulations is what section? My question to you is, what particular act are we discussing here that I am liable to do these things that you claim I'm liable to do?
Your exact question would be again? Okay, what is the section that what? But I guess I'm still not understanding your question, Mr. Harrell.
Well, you must be familiar with what that you have the police powers to enforce.
Yes.
The prosecutor absolutely ignored him. And he started slandering Mr. Harrell. Just started attacking his character.
They're calling us tax cheats, they're calling us fanatics, they're calling us weirdos. I don't care what you call me, but I have one question. Where is the law? Show me the law.
They can't let this turn into a rational debate, because if they do, they lose it. So they have to insult people and say it's frivolous.
We felt like that there was an overall arrogance and that they were railroading Mr. Harrell and wanting us to participate. Judge Coogan, he looked right at us and he said, I will instruct the jury according to the law. We were sent to deliberation. The judge promised us that he would give us the law. And we looked and we looked and it was not there. We wrote a note to the judge asking for a copy of the law. 10 minutes later, we get a note back. You have everything you need, but there was no law. And he had promised us. At that point, I felt betrayed. I felt like this man promised us the law, and that's what this whole thing is about, the law. We request it, and he still denies us the law.
And the reason they didn't do it was why?
Because there is no law. Remember, we're talking about the Illinois state law here, okay, which is a law in Illinois. So we got out that law, and we read it several times, and I said, okay, wait, you know, because they kept saying, but this is a law in Illinois. And I said, look at the beginning of it. It says, anyone required to file a federal income tax return is required to file an Illinois tax return. I said, if it is true that he's not required to file a federal return, then that nullifies the Illinois law. Two people, they kept saying, but he's going to get by with it. And I said, what is he getting by with but his rights? If there is no law, he's not breaking a law. He's just standing on his rights. Are we going to deny him that? That's when this one juror sat back and kind of rolled his eyes and he said, you mean we don't have to pay taxes? All of a sudden we realized that this trial was much bigger. And the ramifications of this trial were going to be so broad if it actually got out. I mean, it's like we had just discovered this great government secret. And so when we came out for the delivering of the verdict, the judge was, I'm sure, even at this point, I'm sure he still thought we would give a guilty verdict. And the reason I say that is because of the look on his face when the first not guilty was read. His face just turned white. I mean, it's like, I don't believe this. The second time, you could hear people out in the audience, just in the courtroom, just going, wow, and the judge is just getting red in the face. I mean, he was just livid. And the judge got up and left. I sat there and I thought, this truly is a victory for the people. And I have never felt more patriotic. And I knew that we had done the right thing. I looked at that man, Mr. Harrell, and I thought, the system might not work all the time, but this time, for that man, it did.
In November 2004, the government arrested former IRS criminal investigator Joe Bannister. They charged him with fraud for telling the American people the truth about the income tax laws. The jury obviously agreed with Joe.
Well, it just showed Mr. Bannister to be honest and straightforward and working within the law.
Vernice Kuglin, a Federal Express pilot, claimed there was no law requiring Americans to file an income tax. She also won in court. 24 people were criminally charged by the IRS because they claimed there was no law requiring them to file an income tax return.
The fact is, neither the judge, nor the prosecutor, nor the IRS could bring that statute in there because it's not in the books. The jury came back with an acquittal for everyone.
When the matter is put to the test, which means in terms of court and enforcement action, there is a 100% success rate in shooting down these arguments.
The mafia has a code and they follow it, and it's a code of honor. But the IRS has no code of honor.
Meet Judge Dawson, a federal judge presiding over the Irwin Schiff tax case, who denied Irwin the ability to prove to a jury that there was no law requiring Americans to file an income tax return. He denied Irwin the right to prove to a jury there was no law by stating, "I will not allow the law in my courtroom." But the judge made sure the government never had to show the law as written by telling the jury, "You must follow the law as I give it to you."
Nobody can know what the law is because the law is what the judges say the law is.
The lower courts today will not allow people, especially in tax cases, to bring in Supreme Court decisions as their evidence.
Here we have a federal judge railroading an American citizen by saying Supreme Court decisions are irrelevant. And again, nothing from the press defending our freedoms. So if you ever find yourself as a juror on a tax case, be sure to ask the judge to show you the statute written by Congress that allows the government to tax the wages of the American people. If the judge can't show you the law, then how can you possibly, in good conscience, convict someone and destroy their life? Let's see how the IRS treated one of America's greatest heroes, and someone I cherished as a child.
Joe Louis was an American icon. Victorious in his first 27 fights, the Brown Bomber quickly rose to heavyweight champion of the world. His 1938 knockout of German Max Schmeling, who represented Hitler's Aryan ideal, earned him the admiration of millions of Americans.
Is watching carefully. Louis nudges him right to the body, a left hook to the jaw, and Schmeling is down. The count is tied.
Right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, Joe had a title fight where he donated his fee to Navy War Relief.
Well, I'm not working for nothing. I'm working for my country, and I think that's about the greatest piece of work that anybody can do.
Well, I certainly agree with you for that, but you're turning over an awful lot of money.
Well, we all turn over a whole lot for this country at this time.
Joe volunteered for the segregated Army and defended his title while in the service, this time donating his normal fee to Army Relief.
I'm only doing what any red-blood American would do.
Since the checks were in Joe's name, the IRS taxed him on their full amount, even though he never saw a penny of it. At the end of the war, Joe was awarded the Legion of Merit. But what most people didn't know was that the IRS was charging him $50,000 a year in interest alone on his debt. When Joe's beloved mother died, leaving him $600, the IRS immediately seized it. They also confiscated all of his children's trust funds. Joe was forced to continue fighting until he was 37 and out of shape, just to pay off his ever-mounting debt to the IRS, which grew to $1 million, $100,000 a year just in interest. At the end of his life, Joe was forced to become a greeter at a Las Vegas hotel just to make ends meet.
It was a shameful thing to see a man like him, great fighter, great human being, being humiliated and destroyed in this manner, because after all, when you owe Internal Revenue money, no matter what you have, they take away from you. And they took a lot away from Joe Louis.
I made a decision to drive to Virginia Beach from Washington because I had heard stories about two law-abiding families who had been brutalized by the IRS. They were falsely accused by their bookkeeper of being drug smugglers and tax cheats. And incredibly to me, without any investigation, the IRS proceeded to raid their place of business and their homes, even though they had done absolutely nothing wrong.
On Saturday morning, 4 different raiding parties proceeded to raid 4 locations on a Saturday, the day before Easter.
I was the manager on duty, and I was up in the deli, and people came through the door.
How many came in the door?
Maybe about 15 or 20 people.
15 to 20 armed agents.
With dogs, with guns. They made me get everybody they went in the kitchen, they went in the deli, they went all over the whole restaurant, told all the customers, took forks out of their hands while they were eating their breakfast and told them they had to leave.
I got the frantic call from Edie. And she said, something wrong. So anyway, I jump out of bed and I immediately run to the shower. I'm in the shower, and the next thing I know, I hear my son yelling, "Dad!"
I went like this, and boom, I'm slammed against the door and I fall down with the gun in my head. And they're like, "Where's Scotty Miller?" And I'm like, "Dad!" That's all I'm doing is yelling. I'm scared, frightened to death.
And then the next thing I hear is Mr. Miller, the shower curtain is jerked back. I got a gun pointed at my head. Hold it right there. The screams from the little girls who were at a pajama party with my daughter. There was 4 little girls there with my daughter. Of course, mayhem.
There were about 3 men in my bedroom with huge guns. He followed us and wanted to watch us get dressed, and I tried to shut the door, and he puts his foot in the door. Like he's going to sit there and watch us change our clothes. And I was like, excuse me, no.
My neighbors now are all standing out.
Were you still naked?
Well, they handed me a towel at that point. I had a towel wrapped around me.
Did the towel fit?
No, hardly. Hardly. At this point, they were talking about weapons and, and I mean, it's crazy. I mean, they're looking everywhere, going through all my drawers. And I reached for my underwear drawer to get some underwear. They said, don't touch anything, boom. And they're locking their guns up. They hold it right there, don't move around, don't move. And I'm going, whoa. I said, I'd just like to get some underwear on here, I said, I got women standing here.
They keep everything.
How did you conduct your business if the IRS took everything?
We had to do it out of a shoebox so we could keep going because we requested these things, and I'm told that the government's really not, once they do raid and so forth, they're supposed to at least let you, until you're charged with something, continue your business. This wasn't the case. They kept everything.
So you were never even charged?
Absolutely not. Charged with what? And when you speak IRS, the whole world shrivels up. The whole world gets fearful to a point where let's not talk about it. I testified in front of Congress. I would like to know why this dark entity known as the IRS has come into my life and refused to leave. I raised my children with a zero tolerance for dishonesty. And now they must hear allegations that I am a major drug dealer and a tax cheat. A lot of people out there being abused, and a lot of people saying, look, I'll pay it. Just go away. Just go away.
When all that happened, we had to file bankruptcy. We've had cars taken away from us, kept my daughter from going to college.
Do they ever think about the lives that they just destroyed? They think about the ruination of homes and property? No. In this case, we would have never thought this could happen to us. We've never done anything wrong. How can this happen in America when, in my case, personally, I thought that I was doing everything right? I've served my country. I've been to college. At least I've done something in my life. I got a speeding ticket one time. I paid my taxes for 40, 50 years, whatever it was. I've never been audited. What happened here?
I had this really uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach as I was thinking to myself, how did America transform itself from being a truly free country with a servant government where our individual rights were protected by our Constitution to being a country that talked about being free but really wasn't? The change started when the Federal Reserve came into existence and America adopted one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto by bringing to America this central bank. The very same people that backed the Federal Reserve System also backed the graduated income tax, a second plank from the Communist Manifesto. You know that the Federal Reserve is a private bank and not a government agency?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
It's a private bank? That would scare me quite a bit.
What if you learned that the Federal Reserve makes money off the taxes you pay? How would you feel about that?
Angry. Like I'm feeling right now.
I would feel cheated by my government.
I'd be angry.
It kind of sucks. They're pretty much in control of everything.
I decided to drive back to Washington to see Dr. Ron Paul. He had been a congressman for over 20 years. I had met him previously in 1998 when I was running for governor of Nevada, and I knew him to be an honest and sincere man, and I thought he'd be very helpful in letting me know what the future holds for the American people. Who owns the Federal Reserve?
It's secret, and we can't find out what's happening. But the Congress created it, and it's not authorized in the Constitution.
The government borrows money from a private corporation using the name Federal that prints United States on it, and then it pays back to the Fed, which is owned by private banks. We don't know who all those private banks are. The money that the government is paying back to the private bankers is the money that comes